Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and felt his stomach drop. The Galactic Institute of Advanced Sciences stretched out before him like a crystal mountain range. Towers of blue and silver glass reached toward the alien sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float in mid-air. He had seen pictures, but nothing prepared him for the real thing. The air smelled different here on Kepler 442b, sweet and thick, with a hint of metal that made his nose itch. The gravity felt lighter than Earth's, making each step feel like he might bounce too high. Jake gripped his single duffel bag tighter and tried not to look as lost as he felt. Around him, dozens of alien students moved with purpose. A group of tall, thin beings with blue skin and too many eyes glided past without making a sound. Something that looked like a walking tree with silver bark chatted with a creature made entirely of shifting purple mist. Jake had studied alien species for months before coming here, but seeing them in person made his brain hurt. "You must be the human," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see a spider-like creature the size of a small car. 8 legs supported a round body covered in black and gold fur. Multiple eyes blinked at him from what he guessed was its head. "I am HFY, your dorm mate." Jake tried to smile. He had practiced this moment many times, but his mouth felt dry. "Nice to meet you. I'm Jake Morrison." HFY's fur shifted colors, creating patterns that moved across its body like living art. "Your emotional scent indicates fear and excitement. This is normal for new students. Come, I will show you to our quarters." Their room was bigger than Jake expected, with 2 sleeping areas separated by a common space. His side looked almost normal, with a bed and desk that could have come from any Earth college. HFY's side had what looked like a large web stretched between metal posts and several containers filled with dark liquid. "The orientation begins in 1 hour," HFY said, its fur flashing blue and green. "You will need to collect your class schedule from the academic office. Building 7, Level 12. Jake nodded and tried to remember the campus map he had memorized. Everything here was numbered and color-coded, but the alien writing still looked like random squiggles to him. His translation device would help, but he worried about looking stupid in front of beings who could probably think faster than he could breathe. The academic office buzzed with activity. Students of every shape and size waited in lines that seemed to organize themselves without any clear system. Jake found what he hoped was the right cue and stood behind a being that looked like a walking crystal formation. "Next," called a voice from behind a desk that curved like a wave. Jake approached and handed over his identification chip. The being behind the desk had gray skin and large black eyes. It scanned Jake's chip and made a clicking sound. "Human exchange student. Jake Morrison, engineering major. You have been assigned to theoretical warfare and tactical analysis." Jake blinked. "I think there's been a mistake. I signed up for advanced materials engineering." The desk being clicked again and checked its screen. "No mistake. All exchange. Students must take 1 core military science course. This was in your acceptance package." "But I've never studied military science. I don't know anything about warfare." "That is not our concern. Building 15, Level 8. Professor Commander, Tolvak. Classes begin tomorrow at 800 Galactic Standard Time." Jake took his schedule card and walked away feeling confused. He had read every document they sent him 3 times. He was sure there was no mention of military classes. But arguing with alien bureaucracy seemed like a bad way to start his first day. The dining complex occupied an entire building, with sections designed for different atmospheric needs. Jake found the oxygen-breathing section and got in line behind what looked like a walking lizard wearing a military uniform. The food options included things he recognized and many things he definitely did not. He settled for something that looked like pasta and found an empty table. Around him, groups of alien students chatted in dozens of languages. His translation device picked up fragments, discussions about quantum mechanics, complaints about professors, gossip about who was dating, whom. It almost felt normal. "You're one of the humans," said a voice. Jake looked up to see a young woman with dark hair and friendly eyes. She was definitely human, which made Jake feel relieved and guilty at the same time. "Jake Morrison," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Lisa Chen," she replied, sitting down with her tray. "Xenobiology major. I heard there are only 12 of us humans in the whole institute." 12 out of how many students? About 50,000 spread across 6 planets in this system. We're definitely the minority. Lisa took a bite of something green and made a face. "How are you finding it so far?" "Overwhelming. And apparently I'm taking a military science class I never signed up for," Lisa laughed. "Welcome to alien education. I got stuck in something called interspecies diplomatic protocol, even though I just want to study alien bacteria. The good news is that most of the other students are curious about humans. The bad news is that some of them think we're too primitive to be here." "What do you mean?" "Humans only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. Most of these species have been spacefaring for thousands of years. Some of them see us as the new kids who don't belong at the grown-up table." Jake pushed his food around his plate. "Great. So I'm going to stick out even more in a military class." "Maybe. Or maybe you'll surprise them. Humans have survived some pretty tough situations back on Earth. Ice ages, plagues, wars. Maybe that counts for something." After dinner, Jake walked back to his dorm through corridors filled with alien students. He passed study groups where beings with tentacles worked complex equations in mid-air, while others that looked like living rocks solved problems by changing their internal structure. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing except him. In his room, HFY was hanging from its web, reading something on a floating display. "How was your first day, human Jake?" "Confusing. I'm taking a class I don't understand with a professor, whose name I can't pronounce." HFY's fur shifted to yellow and orange patterns. "This indicates amusement in my species. Most students find their first semester challenging, but humans are known for adaptation, yes? You survived on a planet that tried to kill you for millions of years." Jake sat on his bed and looked out the window at the alien landscape. 3 moons hung in the purple sky, and strange plants that glowed with their own light dotted the hills beyond the campus. Tomorrow he would sit in a classroom full of beings from warrior races and ancient civilizations, trying to learn about warfare when he had never even been in a real fight. But HFY was right about one thing. Humans were good at adapting. Jake had made it this far, farther from home than any human had ever traveled for education. He could handle one difficult class, he hoped. Jake arrived at Building 15 20 minutes early, hoping to find a seat in the back where he could hide. The classroom was huge, with curved walls that rose up like an amphitheater. Seats were designed for different body types, from small pods that looked perfect for gaseous beings to large platforms that could hold something the size of a small building. He chose a human-sized chair halfway up the left side and pulled out his tablet. Other students began filing in, and Jake felt his heart sink. These were not ordinary college students. Many wore what looked like military uniforms or ceremonial armor. A group of reptilian beings with scars across their faces took seats near the front. Behind them, a cluster of insect-like creatures clicked and buzzed in what sounded like tactical discussions. A massive being that looked like a cross between a rhino and a tank squeezed through the door and found a reinforced platform. Its hide was covered in metal plates, and Jake could see weapon ports built into its arms. Next to it, a group of pale, thin humanoids with oversized heads sat perfectly still, their large black eyes staring straight ahead. Jake was beginning to understand why he felt out of place. "Attention!" boomed a voice from the front of the room. The professor entered through a door Jake hadn't noticed. Commander Tholvac was 7 feet tall with dark red skin and bone ridges that ran from his forehead to the back of his skull. He wore a black uniform covered in medals and symbols that probably meant he had conquered entire planets. "I am Commander Tholvac of the Draknari Imperial Navy," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "I have fought in 16 campaigns across 12 star systems. I have commanded fleets that have reduced enemy worlds to ash. You are here to learn the art of warfare from someone who has mastered it." The alien students sat up straighter. Some made what Jake guessed were gestures of respect in their cultures. Jake just tried to look like he belonged. This course will cover fleet tactics, planetary assault strategies, siege warfare, and the management of galactic conflicts, Commander Tholvac continued. "We will study the great military minds of known space and analyze battles that shape the current political landscape." He paused and let his gaze sweep across the room. When his eyes found Jake, they stopped. "I see we have a human in this class. How interesting. Perhaps you can tell us what your species contributes to the study of warfare." Every alien head turned toward Jake. He felt heat rise in his cheeks and tried to think of something intelligent to say. "Well, humans have fought wars for thousands of years." "Thousands of years," Commander Tholvac repeated, his voice dripping with mockery. "The Draknari have fought for 50,000 years. The Sauroch Empire has military traditions that stretch back 100,000 years. Your species has barely left its home system, and you want to study warfare with beings who have conquered galaxies?" Laughter rippled through the classroom. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of amusement adults might show when a child tries to join a serious conversation. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment. "However," the commander continued, "you are here, so you will learn. Perhaps you can serve as an example of how primitive species approach conflict." The next 3 hours were torture. Commander Tholvac lectured about space fleet formations, using examples from battles Jake had never heard of. He talked about logistics for armies that numbered in the billions and strategies for wars that lasted centuries. The other students took notes on devices that projected holographic displays or directly interfaced with their minds. Jake scribbled notes on his tablet and tried to keep up. When the commander mentioned standard defensive patterns, everyone else nodded like they had learned about these in elementary school. When he discussed acceptable casualty ratios for orbital bombardment, Jake felt sick to his stomach. During a break, Jake overheard conversations that made him realize how out of his depth he was. The Rhino tank being was casually discussing a battle where it had personally destroyed 3 enemy destroyers. The insect creatures were debating the finer points of chemical warfare against silicon-based life forms. "You look lost," said a voice beside him. Jake turned to see one of the pale humanoids with large heads. "I am Zaraoth of the Ethereal Collective. You are the human student." Jake Morrison. And yes, I'm definitely lost. Zara Oth's large eyes seemed to look right through him. Your species interests us. You have survived on a world that most civilizations would consider uninhabitable. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts. Yet you not only survived, you thrived. Thanks, I guess. But I don't think that helps me understand galactic military strategy. Perhaps it helps more than you think. When class resumed, Commander Tholvac announced their first practical exercise. You will be divided into teams of 6. Each team will defend a mining station against an attacking fleet. You have 1 hour to prepare your strategy. Jake found himself assigned to a team with Zara Oth, 2 of the reptilian Sauroch warriors, one of the insect beings called Krinda, and the massive rhino tank creature who introduced himself as Bractor. "This is simple," growled one of the Sauroch. "We establish a defensive perimeter, concentrate our firepower, and engage the enemy fleet at maximum range." "Agreed," rumbled Bractor. "Standard defensive doctrine. Meet force with greater force." Krinda clicked its mandibles in agreement. "My species has used this strategy for 10,000 years. It is proven effective." Jake looked at the station. Schematics on his tablet. The mining facility was built around a large asteroid with multiple docking bays, processing plants, and living quarters. According to the scenario, they were facing a fleet 3 times their size with superior firepower. "What if we don't fight them the way they expect?" Jake asked quietly. The Sauroch warrior looked at him with yellow eyes. "Explain, human." "Well, this is a mining station, right? It's full of industrial equipment, ore processors, plasma cutters, drilling rigs. What if we used those as weapons?" "Mining equipment is not designed for combat," Bractor stated. "No, but it could be adapted, and the enemy wouldn't expect it. They'd plan for defensive turrets and shield generators, not for mining lasers reconfigured as weapons." Zara Oth tilted her head. "Continue this thought." Jake pulled up the station's layout and began pointing to different sections. "The ore processors use controlled explosions to break apart asteroids. If we rigged them to overload in sequence, we could create a chain reaction that would damage any ships that got too close. The cargo haulers could be loaded with raw ore and launched like massive projectiles. The mining drones could be programmed to swarm enemy ships and interfere with their sensors." "This is not honorable combat," one of the Sauroch protested. "But it might work," Zara Oth said thoughtfully. "Human, your species survived by using tools in unexpected ways. This is an extension of that behavior." Krinda's antennae twitched rapidly. "The tactical computer modeling indicates a 67% chance of success with this approach, compared to 12% with standard defensive strategies." Jake felt a spark of excitement. "We could also use the station's communication array to broadcast false signals. Make the enemy think there are more defenders than there actually are, or that reinforcements are coming." "Deception is a valid military tactic," Bractor admitted grudgingly. "And," Jake continued, getting more confident, "we could evacuate sections of the station and then blow them up when enemy troops board. Make them think they're winning, then spring traps." The Sauroch warrior's eyes narrowed. "Your species fights without honor." "My species fights to survive," Jake replied. They implemented Jake's strategy in the simulation. The results shocked everyone, including Jake. Not only did they successfully defend the mining station, they actually managed to capture 2 enemy vessels using modified cargo nets and mining cables. The simulation awarded them the highest defensive rating in the class's recorded history. Commander Tholvac studied the results with obvious displeasure. "This is not proper military doctrine," he announced to the class. "These tactics rely on deception and the misuse of civilian equipment. No civilized species would fight in such a manner." "But it worked," Zara Oth pointed out. "It worked in a simulation against predictable enemy behavior," the commander snapped. "Real warfare requires discipline, honor, and adherence to established protocols. What the human has demonstrated is nothing more than lucky primitive thinking." As the class ended, Jake packed his tablet with mixed feelings. His strategy had worked better than anyone expected, but the professor clearly disapproved. He wondered if he had made a mistake by speaking up. "That was impressive, human Jake," Krinda said as they walked out together. "My species values efficiency, above all else." "Your approach was highly efficient." Zara Oth nodded in agreement. "We would like to study your tactical methods further. Perhaps you could share more examples of human warfare?" Jake felt a small smile cross his face. Maybe he didn't know about galactic military traditions, but apparently he knew things that even these experienced alien warriors had never considered. For the first time since arriving at the Institute, he felt like he might actually belong here. He just hoped Commander Tholvac would give him the chance to prove it. Word spread fast in the dormitories. Jake discovered this when he returned to his room to find a small crowd of alien students waiting in the hallway outside his door. They looked at him with new interest, very different from the polite curiosity he had grown used to. "You are the human who defeated the Catharan defense scenario," said a tall, crystalline being with faceted skin that reflected rainbow colors. "I am Velmora of the Silicon Hegemony. We wish to understand your methods." Zexhai emerged from their room, its fur displaying rapid color changes that Jake had learned meant excitement or stress. "Human Jake, you have become famous. 3 different species have asked me about your tactical thinking." "It was just one simulation," Jake said, feeling overwhelmed by the attention. "One simulation that achieved results no student has matched in 12 years, Velmora replied. "The tactical computer rates your defensive strategy as revolutionary." More students began gathering. Jake recognized some from his warfare class, but others were completely new. A group of the gaseous nebulae entities floated nearby, their translucent forms shifting colors as they communicated with each other. Several of the tree-like Verdani swayed on their root feet, making sounds like wind through leaves. "Perhaps we could discuss this in a more private setting," suggested Zara Oth, appearing beside Jake. "The human needs space to process this attention." Jake felt grateful for the intervention. They moved to one of the study lounges, a circular room with adjustable furniture that could accommodate different alien anatomies. As Jake settled into a human-sized chair, he found himself surrounded by some of the most advanced beings in the galaxy, all waiting to hear what he had to say. "I don't understand why everyone is so interested," Jake began. "What I suggested seemed pretty obvious to me." "That is exactly why it is remarkable," said Krinda, her insectoid head tilting to one side. "Your solutions are obvious to humans, but impossible for us to conceive. This suggests a fundamental difference in thinking patterns." Velmora's crystalline surface shifted through several colors. "My species has fought wars for 200,000 years. We have never considered using industrial equipment as weapons. The concept violates our understanding of proper tool usage." "But why?" Jake asked. "A plasma cutter is just a focused energy beam. Why wouldn't you think to point it at enemy ships instead of asteroids?" The question created a long silence. Jake could see the alien students exchanging glances, or what passed for glances among species with different sensory systems. "Because," Zara Oth said slowly, We categorize tools by their intended function. A mining laser is for mining. A weapon is for fighting. Your species appears to categorize tools by their potential applications. Jake frowned, trying to understand the distinction. Don't all species do that? I mean, if you're starving, you'd use a shovel to dig for roots, right? Even though it's meant for digging holes? Most species would create a specialized root-gathering tool, Krinda replied. Or modify the shovel specifically for that purpose. You suggest using the shovel as is for an unintended function. Your species survived an ice age with primitive technology, added a new voice. Jake turned to see Bractor squeezing through the doorway. Most civilizations develop space travel to escape planetary challenges. Humans endured and adapted instead. Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling like he was discovering something important about both humanity and alien thinking. So when other species face problems, they develop new technology to solve them. When humans face problems, we figure out new ways to use what we already have? Precisely, Zara Oth confirmed. It is a survival strategy that requires constantly reconceptualizing the world around you. Most species find this mentally exhausting. But it makes you unpredictable, Velmora observed. In the simulation, the enemy AI could not adapt to your tactics because they fell outside all known parameters. You created entirely new categories of warfare. Jake spent the next 2 hours answering questions about human history and military conflicts. He found himself explaining concepts that seemed basic to him but amazed the alien students. The idea of guerrilla warfare particularly fascinated them. Small groups of fighters hide in forests and attack supply lines, Krinda repeated. But this provides no territorial gain. What is the strategic objective? To make the enemy's occupation so costly that they eventually give up and leave, Jake explained. But that could take years, Bractor rumbled. Decades, even. Sometimes it did. The point isn't to win quickly. The point is to make sure the enemy can't win at all. This led to a discussion about the Vietnam War, which completely baffled the assembled aliens. Jake tried to explain how a technologically inferior force had defeated one of Earth's most advanced militaries through patience, local knowledge, and unconventional tactics. The superior force possessed advanced aircraft, guided weapons, and overwhelming firepower, Velmora summarized. Yet they were defeated by an enemy using primitive weapons and outdated equipment? The advanced force expected their enemies to fight like a modern military, Jake explained. When the Vietnamese didn't follow those rules, the high-tech weapons became less effective. This is fascinating, Zara Oth said. Your species appears to specialize in asymmetric warfare, fighting against opponents who should be able to defeat you? I guess we had to, Jake replied. Humans spent most of their history being smaller and weaker than the things that wanted to eat them. We survived by being smarter and more adaptable. Over. The following days, Jake found himself at the center of an informal study group that grew larger each evening. Students from dozens of species brought their tactical problems to him, curious to see how human thinking might approach their military challenges. Lisa Chen joined them on the third night, bringing insights from her xenobiology classes. I've been studying how different species approach problem-solving, she announced. Most alien civilizations develop along specialized lines. They get really good at one type of thinking and stick with it. Like what? Jake asked. The cerebral. Collective processes information logically and sequentially. They're amazing at complex calculations, but terrible at intuitive leaps. The Sauroch are phenomenal at direct confrontation but struggle with subtle strategies. The Ethereals are great at long-term planning but have trouble adapting to rapid changes. And humans? Zara-Oth inquired. Humans are generalists, Lisa continued. We're not the best at any one type of thinking, but we can switch between different approaches depending on what the situation requires. It's messy and inefficient, but it makes us adaptable. Jake began sharing more examples from human military history. He told them about the Trojan horse, which introduced the concept of deception on a strategic scale. He explained blitzkrieg tactics, where speed and coordination replaced traditional battle lines. He described the Manhattan Project, where scientific research became a weapon more powerful than any army. Your species weaponizes everything, observed Velmora after Jake finished explaining how the Allies used Enigma code breaking to win World War II. Information, deception, industrial capacity, even weather patterns. Everything can be a weapon if you use it right, Jake agreed. Or everything can be a tool to solve problems. I guess it depends on your perspective. The study sessions began attracting attention from faculty members. Professor Kethlar from the history department attended one evening and listened as Jake described the concept of total war. Human conflicts involve entire populations, the professor asked, his tentacles writhing with what Jake had learned indicated deep thought. Civilian industries, economic systems, even cultural institutions become legitimate targets. Not legitimate, Jake corrected quickly, but practical. In a total war, everything that supports your enemy's ability to fight becomes something you need to stop. This is morally problematic, Kethlar observed. Yeah, it is, Jake admitted. But when you're fighting for survival, moral problems become luxury concerns. Word of the study group reached Commander Tholvac, who attended the next session unannounced. Jake felt his stomach drop when the imposing Draknari officer entered the lounge. I hear the human has been teaching alternative tactical concepts, the commander said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We have been learning about human military history, Zara-Oth replied carefully. Human military history, Commander Tholvac repeated. A species that has never fought beyond its own planet wants to teach warfare to civilizations that have conquered star systems. Perhaps, Velmora interjected, her crystalline surface flashing red, conquest and survival require different skills. The commander's bone ridges darkened with anger. Proper military doctrine is built on principles that have been tested across thousands of campaigns. Honor, discipline, and adherence to established protocols ensure victory and minimize chaos. But what if the enemy doesn't follow those principles? Jake asked before he could stop himself. Commander Tholvac turned his full attention to Jake, and for a moment, the room felt very cold. Then they are not civilized opponents worthy of honorable combat. What if they don't care about being honorable? Jake pressed. What if they just want to win? Jake spent the entire night preparing his presentation, knowing that Commander Tholvac expected him to fail. He gathered examples from human history, organized them by tactical principles, and tried to present them in ways that would make sense to alien military minds. By morning, he had filled his tablet with case studies ranging from ancient battles to modern conflicts. He was reviewing his notes over breakfast when the emergency sirens began. The sound was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. It started as a low hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves, then built into a penetrating wail that made his teeth ache. Around him in the dining complex, alien students stopped eating and looked up with expressions that Jake was learning to recognize as concern across multiple species. Holographic displays materialized throughout the room, showing the angular face of Director Quental, the Institute's administrator. All students and faculty are to report to emergency assembly areas immediately. This is not a drill. Long-range sensors have detected an unidentified fleet approaching the Kepler 442 system. Jake felt his stomach clench. He had been so focused on fitting in at school that he had almost forgotten they were living in a galaxy where wars actually happened. The conversations about military tactics and historical battles suddenly felt much more real. Students began moving with practiced efficiency toward designated areas. Jake followed the crowd, noting how different species organized themselves. The military academy students formed neat formations and moved as units. The civilian students clustered in groups based on their dormitory assignments. Everyone seemed to know what to do except Jake. He found himself in Assembly Area 7, a large auditorium that could hold several thousand beings. The curved seating filled quickly as students poured in through multiple entrances. Jake spotted Lisa Chen near the front and worked his way down to sit beside her. "Any idea what's happening?" he asked. "Nothing good," she replied, pointing at the display screens around the room. "Look at the faculty section." Jake looked and felt his worry increase. The professors and administrators were clearly agitated. Species that normally maintained perfect composure were showing obvious signs of stress. Commander Tholvac stood with a group of military instructors, his bone ridges dark with tension. Director Quental took the stage, her forearms gesturing for silence. "Students, we face an unprecedented situation. An unknown fleet of 47 vessels has entered our star system. They do not respond to standard communication protocols, and their ship configurations do not match any known civilization in our databases." A murmur ran through the assembled students. Jake could see fear in alien faces that had seemed so confident just hours before. "The fleet is currently 3 days out from Kepler 442b at their present speed," the director continued. "Galactic Defense Forces have been notified, but the nearest military units are 6 days away. We are activating emergency evacuation procedures." Jake raised his hand, feeling foolish but needing to ask. "What if the unknown ships are peaceful? Maybe they're just exploring, like humans were 50 years ago." Director Quental's large eyes focused on him. "That is possible, human Jake Morrison. However, preliminary scans indicate these vessels carry weapon systems far more advanced than any known technology. Additionally, their approach vector suggests they have been scanning our defenses for several weeks without announcing their presence." The Maobas director activated a holographic display that showed the unknown fleet. Jake stared at the ships and felt a chill run down his spine. They looked wrong somehow, like machines designed by something that had never seen an organic life form. Smooth, black hulls with no windows or external features, arranged in perfect geometric formations that seemed more mathematical than tactical. "Evacuation will begin immediately," Director Quental announced. "Transport ships are already en route. Priority will be given to students from non-militarized species and those with specialized knowledge critical to galactic civilization." Jake looked around the auditorium and realized that evacuation priority probably put humans near the bottom of the list. They were the newest species in galactic civilization, with no special knowledge or critical skills. If there wasn't enough transport capacity, humans would be among the last to leave. Lisa seemed to have reached the same conclusion. "We might be stuck here," she whispered. Faculty members with military experience will remain to coordinate defensive preparations, the director continued. All classes are suspended except for theoretical warfare and tactical analysis, which will become a crisis management course. Students with relevant backgrounds are encouraged to volunteer for the Defense Planning Committee. Jake felt his heart pound. 3 days ago, he had been struggling to understand basic galactic military concepts. Now he was facing the possibility of actual combat against an unknown enemy. The assembly broke up into organized chaos as students received individual instructions based on their species, academic background, and evacuation priority. Jake and Lisa found themselves directed to a secondary briefing room, along with other students whose status was unclear. Commander Tholvok entered the room with several other military instructors. His expression was grim as he looked over the assembled students. "You are the remainder," he announced. "Some of you will be evacuated if transport becomes available. Others will remain here regardless. I need volunteers for defensive planning." Jake surprised himself by raising his hand. So did Lisa, Zara-Oth, Krinda, and about 20 other students. Commander Tholvok nodded approvingly. "Follow me. We have work to do." They were led to a command center that Jake hadn't known existed. Hidden beneath the main academic complex, it was filled with holographic displays, communication equipment, and tactical planning systems. Jake realized that the Galactic Institute was more than just a school. It was also a strategic facility in neutral space, important enough to have serious defensive capabilities. "Situation briefing," Commander Tholvok announced, activating the main display. "Unknown fleet, composition unknown, capabilities unknown, intentions unknown. Standard evacuation protocols are failing because their ships are jamming long range. Communications. Transport vessels are having trouble coordinating pickup schedules." Jake studied the tactical display and felt overwhelmed by the complexity. Fleet positions, defensive installations, evacuation routes, communication networks. It was like trying to understand a three-dimensional puzzle while blindfolded. "Sir," said one of the Sawrock military students, "standard defensive doctrine calls for concentrated firepower at maximum range. We should position our orbital platforms to create overlapping fields of fire." "Agreed," rumbled Bractor. "Meet their approach with superior positioning and coordinated volleys." Commander Tholvok nodded and began organizing the defense around. Established military principles. Jake watched as tactical positions were assigned, weapon systems were coordinated, and communication protocols were established. It was exactly the kind of systematic, logical approach that galactic civilizations had used successfully for thousands of years. It was also exactly the kind of predictable response that the unknown fleet had probably been studying for weeks. Jake raised his hand hesitantly. "Commander, what if they've been watching us prepare? What if they already know how we're going to defend ourselves?" Elaborate, human. "Well, you said they've been scanning our defenses for weeks without announcing themselves. If they're hostile, they've been studying how we fight. They probably know our standard defensive patterns better than we do." The room fell quiet. Jake could see alien military students processing this possibility, and he could tell from their expressions that it worried them. "If that's true," Lisa added, "then using standard tactics would be like fighting with our strategy written on a billboard." Commander Tholvok's bone ridges darkened as he considered the implications. "What do you suggest, humans?" Jake looked at the tactical display and tried to think like the unknown fleet commanders. "They've studied our defenses, so they know where our weapons are and how we'll use them. But what if we don't fight the way they expect? What if we make them adapt to something completely new?" "Explain." "Instead of concentrating our firepower, What if we scattered it? Instead of meeting them at maximum range, what if we let them get close and then hit them from unexpected directions? Make them fight a battle they didn't prepare for. Zara Oath leaned forward, her large eyes reflecting the holographic displays. Human Jake proposes deception on a strategic scale. Appear weak when you are strong. Appear predictable when you plan surprise. This violates established military doctrine, one of the Sauroch protested. Maybe that's exactly why it might work, Jake replied. If they've studied established military doctrine, then following it is the worst thing we could do. Commander, Tholvak stared at the tactical display for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Human, you have 1 hour to present an alternative defensive strategy. If your approach has merit, we will consider implementing it. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. In 1 hour, he would need to propose tactics that could save the lives of 50,000 students and faculty. He was a college sophomore from Ohio who had never been in a real fight, and he was about to plan the defense of an entire world. Jake's hour turned into 6 hours of frantic planning. Working with Lisa, Zara Oth, and Krinda, he developed what he privately called chaos theory warfare. Instead of the orderly defensive positions that galactic militaries favored, Jake proposed something that violated every principle of civilized combat. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Rather than concentrate their forces, they would scatter them randomly across the system. Instead of establishing clear command structures, each defensive unit would operate independently with only basic coordination. Most importantly, they would abandon all standard tactical protocols and improvise responses based on immediate circumstances. "This is madness," declared Velmora when Jake presented the strategy to the assembled volunteers. "Military effectiveness requires coordination and predictable command structures." "That's exactly why it might work," Jake replied, pointing at the holographic display. "The enemy has been studying predictable command structures for weeks. They know how we coordinate, how we communicate, how we make tactical decisions. But they can't predict chaos." Commander Tholvak studied the proposal with obvious displeasure. "Human, this approach could result in our own forces attacking each other. Without proper coordination, we risk friendly fire incidents and tactical confusion." "Yes, sir, we do. But the alternative is fighting a battle the enemy has already won by studying our standard procedures." The debate was interrupted by alarm klaxons. The unknown fleet had accelerated and would arrive in 18 hours instead of 3 days. Evacuation transports were still 12 hours away, assuming the jamming didn't get worse. "Decision time," Commander Tholvak announced grimly. "We implement the humans' chaos strategy, or we follow established doctrine and hope our experience compensates for their intelligence advantage." The vote was close, but Jake's proposal won by a margin of 3. As the command center erupted into activity, Jake felt sick to his stomach. He had just convinced some of the galaxy's best military minds to abandon thousands of years of tactical knowledge in favor of organized confusion. 12 hours later, the first Devourer ships entered the outer system. Jake watched from the command center as the enemy fleet moved with mechanical precision. Their ships maintained perfect formations and responded to the Institute's defensive positions exactly as predicted. It was clear they had studied galactic military doctrine extensively. "Orbital Platform 7 is engaging," reported a technician. "Direct hit on the enemy lead vessel." On the display, Jake watched as one of the black ships absorbed the energy. "Blast without apparent damage." Seconds later, it returned fire with a weapon that turned Platform 7 into expanding plasma. Platform 7 destroyed, the technician announced unnecessarily. The pattern repeated across the system. Every time the Institute's defenses acted according to standard protocols, the enemy countered perfectly. Within 2 hours, half of their orbital platforms were destroyed and the evacuation transports had been forced to retreat. They're adapting to our weapons faster than we can target them, Commander Tholvak reported. Their ships appear to analyze our energy signatures and develop countermeasures in real time. Jake felt despair settling over the command center. The enemy wasn't just prepared for galactic military tactics. They were learning and adapting faster than organic minds could compensate. Then Zara-Oth activated an unauthorized communication channel. All defensive units, this is Ethereal Command 7. Disregard previous coordination protocols. Implement Chaos Pattern Alpha immediately. Jake watched in amazement as their scattered defensive units began acting completely unpredictably. Mining platforms started firing civilian ore processors at enemy ships. Research vessels launched clouds of experimental nanobots. Even the campus security drones began attacking in swarms, using nothing but their emergency beacons as crude guidance systems. The effect on the enemy fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been adapting perfectly to conventional weapons suddenly found themselves under attack by modified agricultural equipment, industrial robots, and improvised explosives made from chemistry lab supplies. Devourer formation coherence is breaking down, reported Krinda from her monitoring station. They appear to be experiencing systematic malfunctions. Jake realized what was happening. The enemy ships were so focused on adapting to conventional weapons that the completely unconventional attacks were overloading their adaptive systems. It was like trying to solve a mathematical equation that kept changing into poetry. All units, continue random engagement patterns, Commander Tholvak ordered, his voice carrying new hope. Do not establish any predictable behaviors. But Jake could see that the enemy was beginning to adapt even to chaos. Their ships were spreading out, trying to isolate and destroy the unpredictable defensive units one by one. Worse, dropships were launching from the larger vessels, heading directly for the planet's surface. They're bringing the fight to us, Jake announced. Ground assault incoming. Within minutes, the first enemy troops were landing on Kepler 442b. Jake got his first clear look at the Devourers through surveillance feeds, and he immediately understood why they were so effective. They weren't organic beings at all. They were machines, but not like any robots Jake had ever seen. Each Devourer unit looked like a collection of geometric shapes that could reconfigure themselves for different tasks. One moment, a unit might be a walking platform bristling with weapons. The next, it would reshape into a flying scout or a burrowing infiltrator. They moved with perfect coordination and adapted their forms to counter whatever resistance they encountered. Evacuation is no longer possible, Director Quintal announced over the communication system. All students and faculty are now considered combatants. Defensive positions are being established throughout the Institute. Jake found himself assigned to defend Academic Complex 7 along with 40 other students and 3 faculty members. As he grabbed an energy rifle from the emergency weapons locker, he tried not to think about how surreal this was. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been understanding alien military theory. Now he was about to fight robot invaders with classmates from a dozen different species. Their defensive position was the main lecture hall where Jake had first attended Commander Tholvak's class. The irony wasn't lost on him as he helped set up barricades using desk units and holographic projectors. This was where he had learned about theoretical warfare. Now it was about to become very practical. Enemy contact, north entrance, called. Out Bractor from his position by the main doors. Multiple Devourer units advancing. Jake watched through the transparent aluminum windows as a squad of the shape-shifting machines approached their building. They moved with mechanical efficiency, but Jake noticed something important. They were advancing in a standard tactical formation, following protocols that any galactic military would recognize. They're still thinking like conventional forces, he realized aloud. Even though they're machines, they're using organic military tactics. What does that mean? Asked Lisa, who was crouched behind a barricade with a medical kit. It means they might have the same blind spots as everyone else, Jake replied. Zara Oth, can you do that thing where you mess with people's minds? I can create confusion and false perceptions, yes, but these are machines. Try it anyway. If they're using copied tactics, maybe they're vulnerable to copied countermeasures. The Devourers burst through the entrance just as Zara Oth extended her mental influence. The lead machines immediately began firing at positions where no defenders were located, apparently seeing targets that didn't exist. It's working, Jake shouted. Keep them confused while we flank them. What followed was the strangest battle Jake could have imagined. Students and faculty used improvised weapons and academic equipment to fight shape-shifting robots in a lecture hall. Velmora turned her crystalline body into a prism that split energy beams into harmless light shows. Krinda used her knowledge of chemistry to create acid bombs from cleaning supplies. Even Professor Kethalar contributed by using his historical knowledge to predict enemy movements based on ancient battle patterns. The Devourers adapted quickly to each new threat, but they couldn't adapt fast enough to handle completely unpredictable tactics used by beings they had never encountered before. Jake's strategy of fighting without rules or patterns proved effective, on a small scale, just as it had in the space battle above. But as reports came in from other parts of the Institute, Jake realized they were only winning individual engagements. The Devourers were learning from each encounter, building a database of effective countermeasures. Soon they would have enough information to overwhelm any defense the Institute could mount. We need to escalate, Jake announced during a brief lull in the fighting. They're adapting to our chaos tactics. We need to get more chaotic. How do we become more chaotic than completely unpredictable? Bractor asked. Jake looked around the lecture hall, taking in the diverse group of alien students who had become his unlikely comrades in arms. Students from warrior races and peaceful civilizations, scientists and engineers, beings who thought with mathematics, and others who processed reality through biological instincts. We stop fighting like separate species and start fighting like humans, he said. We break every rule, use every dirty trick, and make this perso